the bloody truth behind the exchange of legal assets. Just like what happened with gold in the past, the US dollar has now been overthrown overnight. A new currency has officially taken its place. Since 2008, American capitalists have spent exactly 17 years planning this moment. And now you and I are witnessing this historic turning point together. Someone may be smarter than you, more hardworking, from a better background. But in this great cleansing of history, a massive wealth shift between you and them is about to take place. I'm not exaggerating, because a real currency revolution is happening. What do I mean by that? Right now, the world is split into two main viewpoints. The first group believes America is collapsing and that the world must move away from the dollar, a process called de-dollarization, where people stop using the US dollar altogether. The second group believes that no matter how weak the US becomes, there's still no other currency that can truly replace the dollar. The world still buys US bonds because most global foreign exchange reserves are still in US bonds. At first, it sounds like these two views contradict each other. One says no more dollar, the other says the dollar is still fine. But today, America tells you clearly, both sides are actually not in conflict. Why? Because even if the US dollar and its bonds are really in trouble, and even if they do need to be replaced, it doesn't matter. Why? Because the global monetary system is still controlled by American capitalists. Think of it like ancient times. The real power lies with the retired emperor, the Grand Emperor. Even if the current king is no good, it doesn't mean you get to be king. The Grand Emperor can simply replace the weak king with another son, and everything continues as before. What the previous king did, you can't hold him accountable, and the dynasty still belongs to the Grand Emperor. In other words, even if the US dollar really goes to hell, as Warren Buffett once warned, American capitalists can just introduce a new currency and continue controlling it. That way, US monetary dominance doesn't disappear, it simply resets. The whole system of financial exploitation can start all over again. So what do I mean by this? Welcome to the path to prosperity. 100 years ago, when the world still used gold to trade, if you handed someone a piece of paper and said it was a US dollar, they might beat you up and send you to a mental hospital. Because back then, people only trusted gold, a currency believed to be created by God. But after 1930, countries around the world sent all their gold to the US and started using dollars instead. Why? Because having dollars meant you could exchange them for gold from the US. So why carry around heavy gold when a piece of paper could be turned into gold anytime? Over time, people got used to using dollars, so America canceled the gold standard. You could no longer trade dollars for gold. From that moment on, the dollar, a man-made currency, defeated gold, the so-called currency of God, and became the world's main currency. And now in 2025, American capitalists are repeating that same playbook. They're telling the world, if you trade your dollars for this new currency, you can exchange it back into dollars anytime. You don't need to hold on to dollars anymore. Even better, the new currency doesn't need to be carried around, doesn't get wet, and can't be stolen. It's your ticket into the digital world, the metaverse. To put it simply, in the past, people only trusted gold. To make the dollar king, the US tied the dollar to gold, so that trusting gold meant trusting dollars too. Then once everyone trusted the dollar, they cut its tie to gold. And now, to make the new currency king, they're doing the same thing. Today, people trust the dollar, so they link the new currency to the dollar. And when the world fully trusts this new money, won't they just cut it free from the dollar too? A lot of people say Bitcoin is worthless, a bubble, trash, a scam. But if I gave you 10 Bitcoins right now, would you take them? Think about it. Early last year, one Bitcoin was just over $40,000. Now it's $100,000. If I gave you 10 Bitcoins today, you could sell them for $1 million. Would you really say no? But don't get confused. The new king replacing the dollar isn't Bitcoin. I'm also not trying to convince you of Bitcoin's value. I've talked about that 100 times. Whether you believe it or not, Bitcoin has already become the stepping stone for this new currency, thanks to a genius new law passed by the US. On the surface, this law looks like it's just giving all cryptocurrencies a kind of green card, making Bitcoin legal and better protecting people's assets. But in truth, it's a move to crown a new form of money, stablecoin, as the new king, replacing the US dollar. Once stablecoin takes over, it won't matter whether people around the world buy US bonds or not, or whether they lend money to the US or not. Why? Because the US can now just grab your money directly and lend it to itself. What does this mean? If you don't want your savings, assets, or salary to become a sacrifice in this new monetary revolution, and if you even want to use this chance to change your social class, then you should follow my channel, because I'll continue giving you more important information in the future. And if you're worried you'll forget what you heard, like it's a waste of time, then you can hit like on this video so it's saved to your playlist and you can come back anytime. Actually, since 2008, US capitalists have been preparing the way to replace the dollar and crown the new king. What does that mean? If you watched my video last week, you'll understand. In short, as early as 2003, Buffett used the story of a wasteful island and a thrifty island to warn the capitalist class. If the US keeps using real money to buy everything the world produces, then relies on US bonds to borrow money and suck the dollars back, this method will eventually collapse. The US won't be able to pay its debts. Then the world will stop lending to the US. The money America spent can't be recovered, so the only solution is to keep printing money to lend to itself, which will eventually destroy the dollar's value completely. So in 2008, cutting interest rates wasn't enough to save the economy anymore. They had to start printing money. By 2020, printing money meant printing a lot more with no limits. In other words, even 5 years ago, cutting rates and printing money had lost their effectiveness. They couldn't save the economy anymore. Today, the US doesn't even dare cut rates. Why? Because last year, when they lowered rates, no one wanted US bonds anymore. The dollar crashed, and this year we saw a crisis in both stocks and bonds. That's why many people were surprised to see Buffett, who almost never comments on America, suddenly appear late last year and early this year, warning that the dollar is going to hell. He was really sending a signal to US capitalists. It's time for the new currency to rise. So to be clear, we're not yet at the stage of crowning a new king. This is still the phase of rebellion. Think about it. When the dollar rebelled against gold back then, it also acted quietly because the world still used gold. If they had suddenly declared the dollar as a replacement, it would have been seen as a rebellion and failed. So they had to act step by step, quietly. First, link the dollar to gold, pulling all the gold into the US. Then, when the world had no gold left, publicly crown the dollar and cut its tie to gold. Isn't that exactly what's happening now? Today, I tell you, Stablecoin is the new currency that will replace the dollar. But many people don't even know what stablecoin is. Still, what's happening now mirrors the past exactly. Back then, the dollar's rebellion was called the gold standard. Today, the new rebellion is called the Genius Act. On paper, stablecoin is still tied to the US dollar, but in reality, it's already slowly replacing it. So what is stablecoin? This monetary revolution started in 2008 when a new form of money appeared online: Bitcoin. Unlike the dollar, Bitcoin doesn't need to be carried around, doesn't get wet, and as long as you remember your password, you can trade it anytime. Most importantly, it's decentralized, meaning no country controls it and no one can trace your money. That's why huge amounts of money, legal and illegal, have flowed into Bitcoin. So how did the US react? Publicly, it acted like it didn't support Bitcoin, even cracking down on it. But at the same time, it allowed Bitcoin futures to be traded. Doesn't that seem contradictory? Back then, everyone thought the US was afraid Bitcoin would replace the dollar and cause the dollar to lose its position as an international currency. So the US defined Bitcoin as just an investment asset, like a stock, not as a currency. Put simply, if you buy Bitcoin today, its price might go up from $10,000 to $100,000, but it could also fall from $100,000 to $10,000. The price fluctuates a lot. If you use Bitcoin for transactions, it becomes very troublesome. For example, today I use 10 Bitcoins, each worth $10,000. That's $100,000 to buy your house. You expect that 10 Bitcoins equal $100,000. But right after you receive the Bitcoin and I get the house, the price drops to only $1,000 per Bitcoin. So now your 10 Bitcoins are worth just $10,000. This is also why people don't use stocks to trade. The value changes too much. So if you take $1 million in stocks to a bank as collateral, you might only be able to borrow $500,000. In other words, while Bitcoin could function like the dollar, the US currently does not recognize it as money, only as an investment asset. This means the first step the US took was to create a division between Bitcoin and the dollar, to make the world believe that the US government wouldn't allow Bitcoin to replace the dollar. But since Bitcoin is decentralized and the US government can't control it, they had no choice but to accept its existence. And that's why Bitcoin became an investment tool and a way for many people to launder money. Bitcoin's value started from that point. Then came step 2, the introduction of the new king. In the past, the global super rich stored their wealth in Swiss banks. Why? Because Swiss banks had anonymous and secure systems. No one had the right to interfere. Money deposited there wouldn't be frozen. Also, Switzerland is a neutral country, safe from war. That's why Swiss banks were considered the safest in the world. Billionaires, world leaders, and even national treasuries would deposit money there. But after the financial crisis, the US, under the excuse of tighter financial monitoring, demanded that Swiss banks reveal some account information. As a result, the secrecy of Swiss banks started to decline. Huge amounts of money moved into Bitcoin, causing its price to explode. But as mentioned earlier, Bitcoin's price is too volatile. For the wealthy, having assets that can rise and fall unpredictably is too risky. So at this point, the new king officially appeared. Some American capitalists invented something called stablecoin, or stable money. Simply put, if you're doing business in Bitcoin and you receive $100,000 worth of Bitcoin but are afraid the price might drop, you can immediately lock in the value by selling the Bitcoin and converting it to $100,000 in stablecoin. With that $100,000 in stablecoin, you can later convert it back to US dollars anytime, or buy Bitcoin again whenever you want. Today, over half of global Bitcoin traders use stablecoins. So the problem of Bitcoin's unstable price making it unusable as currency, that problem has now been solved, right? Even more importantly, in the past, if you wanted to do business with Americans, you had to convert your money to dollars, then go through the bank to make a transfer. You had to fill out tons of forms, and even after all that, it was just a transfer request. The money hadn't arrived yet. Unless there were no holidays, you'd still have to wait several days, because the money had to go through 2 or 3 intermediaries. On top of that, the fees were high. So when you did an international transfer, the cost was never cheap. And even when the goods arrived, the other side might still not have received the money. But now the whole world can use Bitcoin or stablecoin to transfer money. It takes just a blink and the money arrives. Transfer fees are almost zero. In other words, the second step the US took not only stabilized Bitcoin's value, but also dismantled the old international money transfer system, gradually making cryptocurrencies function more like the dollar, encouraging more and more people to use the new king, i.e., stablecoin, in daily transactions. And now comes step 3, legalizing Bitcoin and stablecoins. In the past, if we wanted to buy or sell Bitcoin, we had to go through private exchanges. And as we know, these private exchanges often took your money and disappeared. But last year, the US officially legalized Bitcoin trading through ETFs. Put simply, Bitcoin trading is now legal. You can buy a Bitcoin ETF just like buying US stocks. You can do it through any stockbroker or bank. And this year, just a few days ago, the US passed a regulation requiring stablecoin issuers to hold cash or US government bonds in a 1:1 ratio. In other words, if you convert $1 million into stablecoin today, the company issuing the stablecoin must use that $1 million to buy US government bonds or deposit the full amount in a bank, untouched. So when you want to convert your stablecoin back into dollars, the company can simply sell the bonds or withdraw from the bank to pay you. This means you won't have to worry about losing your money. In other words, stablecoins are now firmly tied to the US dollar in US government bonds. To put it even more simply, first they attracted dirty money, then they forced billionaires to shift funds from Swiss banks into Bitcoin, and finally they pulled in money from ordinary investors. During this process, they first stripped Bitcoin of its use as a currency, then restored that function using stablecoins. They even tore down their own traditional banking system, and in the end, stood behind stablecoins to link them with the dollar. So now looking back, it makes sense why Bitcoin could soar to $100,000. But when we trade, whether it's stocks, gold, Bitcoin, or the yen, no one has a crystal ball to see the future. We also don't have any insider information. Good news only comes out after everything is already done. So how do we trade? It's simple. Follow those with inside information, the ones who set the rules of the game. Of course, they won't tell you when they're buying or how much they're selling, but the charts will. All the trading footprints of big investors and capitalists are clearly shown on the charts. Our job is to follow the trends they create, see where their money is flowing, and decide when to buy or sell. Here's the most important part. Some people might not understand why the US would swap dollars for stablecoins, support its rise, and do all of this. For what? Friends, after this genius bill was passed, stablecoins became tightly linked to the US dollar and government bonds. This means that for every stablecoin issued, there must be an equivalent dollar backed by bonds behind it. What does this mean? Many people think this gives stablecoin security, making sure they can always be exchanged back for dollars. Just like how in the past, dollars could be exchanged for gold. But I have to laugh, friends. Can you still take your dollars to the Fed and get gold for them today? Back when the dollar was tied to gold, it was really just a promissory note issued by the US government. You gave me your gold and I gave you this dollar note. With that note, you could get your gold back. But to pay for the Korean and Vietnam Wars, the US printed a lot more dollars, so much that the total number of dollars in the world far exceeded the actual amount of gold the Fed had. At that time, the French president noticed something was wrong. He realized that the number of dollars in circulation was many times greater than the US's real gold reserves. That meant if everyone came to the Fed asking for gold in exchange for dollars, the US gold vaults would be emptied. So he acted first, stockpiling dollars and then bringing them to the Fed to exchange for gold. He ended up getting over 3,000 tons. When he couldn't get more, he warned the world. The US doesn't have enough gold to exchange with everyone. If you don't exchange now, those dollars will turn into worthless paper later. So by 1970, the world was lining up with their promissory notes demanding gold. And we all know what happened next. The US flipped the table and said no more. They declared, from now on, we don't use gold. Gold is no longer money. The dollar is. In fact, in the US, if you kept gold privately, you could be jailed for up to 10 years. So at that point, the US turned a promissory note, the dollar, into real money. That piece of debt paper was now gone, wasn't it? So the same logic applies today. The US dollar used to be a promissory note. Now US government bonds are the new debt paper. If the world takes its $36 trillion in US bonds to demand repayment, can the US afford it? Maybe they could repay in dollars, but by then, those dollars would become just paper again. So what should we do? Isn't it enough to just do what we used to? Can't we just turn US bonds into cash and that IOU magically disappears? Here's the key point, everyone. When stablecoins replace the US dollar, and each stablecoin equals $1 backed by US Treasury bonds, then from that moment on, the US no longer needs to sell its bonds. This means the US doesn't need to borrow money from the world anymore. Why? Because when you exchange 10 billion for stablecoins, the company that issues those stablecoins takes your 10 billion and uses it to buy $10 billion worth of US bonds. In other words, from now on, whenever you convert dollars into stablecoins, those dollars are used to buy bonds. You hold the stablecoins, the stablecoin company holds the bonds and earns interest, and the US government holds the cash. So by letting stablecoins replace the dollar, the US can turn government bonds, those IOUs, into currency. And just like that, the debt disappears. I know this might sound confusing, so let me explain more simply. When the dollar used to be tied to gold, it was basically a piece of paper that promised gold. Once the US could no longer deliver gold, they dropped the gold standard and made the dollar into real money. Later, the US created a new kind of IOU called government bonds, US Treasuries. These bonds are promises from the US government saying they owe you dollars. So today, US bonds are like the old dollars. Both are IOUs. And today's dollars are like gold used to be. They've become the new money. What the US wants to do now is turn bonds into stablecoins and eventually stop using dollars altogether. That way the US, as huge debt in bonds becomes like gold in the past, completely erased. This is called monetizing public debt. To put it even more simply, bear with me, back then when the US ditched gold, they were basically telling the world, You can't use dollars to get our gold anymore. Just use dollars directly to trade. Now it's the same idea. You can't use our bonds to get dollars anymore. Just use the bonds directly in the form of stablecoins as a payment method. Right now, the US owes $36 trillion. When they repay it, they first give you dollars. Then you exchange those dollars for stablecoins. And those stablecoins are used to buy bonds. And this cycle keeps repeating. In reality, the US doesn't need to pay back the bonds anymore. Because each time you exchange dollars for stablecoins, that money goes right back to buying bonds. So you're actually using your own money to help pay back the US government's debt. In the end, the dollars you held disappear, and the US pays off its debt using stablecoins, a new form of currency. So when stablecoins are backed by US bonds, and you use $100,000 to buy $100,000 worth of stablecoins, you can use those stablecoins to buy Bitcoin, while the stablecoin company uses your $100,000 to buy $100,000 in US bonds. This means that a single dollar is being used twice, once to buy Bitcoin and once to buy bonds. So the total amount of money in the market stays the same, but the number of assets you can buy increases. That's how a massive amount of US debt quietly gets magically turned into currency, without anyone really noticing. At this point, some people might think I'm just talking nonsense. They might say it's impossible because all stablecoins combined only add up to a few $100 billion, while US bonds total $36 trillion. How could stablecoins possibly cover that? How can they replace the dollar? You're right. If stablecoins could only be used to buy Bitcoin, then their total value would be way too small to solve the US bond problem. But what if stablecoins could be used not just for buying Bitcoin, but also for buying US stocks? Why did I say Bitcoin is just a launch pad for stablecoins? Because up until now, people mostly use stablecoins to buy Bitcoin. As more people use stablecoins, that mission is complete. Now American capitalists have one simple job left: make stablecoins widely accepted. Just look at what happened recently. A US-based crypto exchange has allowed American users to use stablecoins to trade stocks like Apple, Tesla, and Nvidia, some of the hottest stocks right now. What does that mean? Before, stablecoins could only buy crypto. But in the future, if they can directly buy US stocks, then what? The total market value of US stocks is $60 trillion. Isn't that enough to cover the $36 trillion in US debt? Also, a big portion of that $36 trillion debt is actually held by the US Federal Reserve, the Fed. In simple terms, those are debts that don't really need to be paid back. So whether people keep buying US bonds or not doesn't really matter anymore. As long as you use stablecoins to buy US stocks, the US government can directly take your money and buy more bonds. And stablecoins don't have any issuance limit. However many stablecoins the market needs, the US can just create them. That's why Buffett said the US dollar is going to hell. He didn't mean the dollar would become worthless paper or lose all value. He meant it would be replaced by stablecoins. Buffett is holding a huge amount of short-term US bonds, which in a way is like holding a ton of stablecoins. And you see, Trump used to absolutely hate Bitcoin. But what did he do this year? His whole family launched their own cryptocurrencies. In just a few months, they made as much money as their family had saved up over years. He even launched his own stablecoin. That's the kind of strategic move only visionary families make. As for Bitcoin, it's always been something I personally accumulate. Recently in my investment strategy, apart from gold and Japanese yen, Bitcoin has been the biggest moneymaker. Just look at this chart. After a big correction, Bitcoin dropped to the green line, around $77,000, and then started to bounce back. When it broke out of the purple downtrend channel, that meant the short-term downtrend was over. So when the price went above the orange line, around $86,000, we went all in. Right now, I'm still waiting for the next opportunity. You can see the red line. In the last two cases, whenever Bitcoin touched that line, it dropped again, showing it's a strong resistance. But this time, Bitcoin has broken above it and isn't dropping quickly. It's consolidating. It's resting. If Bitcoin later breaks above $110,000 with strong trading volume, I might even increase my position. But if it rises without strong volume, I'll just hold and place my take-profit order around $100,000. If you don't understand why I've made this plan, what you need to do is prepare yourself. Get familiar with my thinking, my language, and fully understand my mindset and investment. I'll continue sharing free content on building wealth, entrepreneurship, investing, and achieving financial freedom. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and feel free to share the video. I sincerely hope everyone who liked this video will soon achieve financial freedom. If just one or two sentences in today's video helped improve your life, I already feel fulfilled.